Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Walkways refurbishment meeting. My name is Bumi Shakuni. I'm the refurbishment design and delivery project manager at the Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team. I'll be chairing this meeting this evening. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Next slide, please. I'm going to start off with a quick introduction to the Lancaster West team working on the external refurbishment of your block. And that's the outside of the buildings themselves, the communal spaces, the lower ground floor levels and the landscaping. Many of you will have met James Caspel, our neighborhood director. And also here today is Andrew Sluizer, who is the head of refurbishment design and delivery, Alfie Peacock, refurbishment design and delivery project officer, Janet Hall, network engagement manager. So you'll probably hear from most of us before the end of the evening. I will now hand over to John Moore, who will introduce the KCA team. John or Caroline?
I was on mute, so I'm not on mute anymore. So thanks, Bunmi. It's been a real pleasure and privilege, I think, for myself and our team to get to know the Lanc West team over the past few months. And sadly, we haven't had a chance to get to know many of you residents because of COVID and so on. You may have seen some of our faces down on site in September, October, November, where we've been looking at some of the empty flats and looking around the buildings. But it's not been possible to meet face to face. But to save a bit of time, I'm just going to shout out the name of the team, and then they're going to kind of say hello so that you can see their face light up on the screen. So I'm the technical director at Carson Architects. Caroline is project associate.
Hi there, Caroline Hull, project associate, working with John and the team.
Sean McGee.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. I'm Sean, project architect on the Walkways with KCA.
We have Madeline, our senior engagement manager.
Hi everyone, I'm Madeline.
Hajir.
Hi, my name is Hajir. I'm a community engagement manager.
Also, we have Neil, I think, on the call tonight.
Yeah, hi John. Nice to meet everybody.
Neil is a specialist consultant who works particularly with younger people when it comes to engagement. And if you go to the next slide, Bunmi, please, I'd like to introduce a couple of new members to the team who are local people. I'm going to shout out the names. Paul. Paul, are you there? Maybe he's on mute. And also Melissa.
Hi everyone. I'm Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. And effectively, they're almost like doing an internship with us to work with you guys to try and develop the co-design ideas for the project.
John, sorry to butt in. We also have Mark Allen on the call, I believe, and he wanted to just say hello.
Mark.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Caroline. My name's Mark Allen. I'm a chartered health and safety consultant working for a company called D-Risk. We are appointed across all projects, refurbishment projects across the estates. Our role is CDM principal designer, which basically means it's our job during the pre-construction design stage to make sure that the works are planned or as safe as can be. So it's our role to make sure that KCA are choosing only the sort of safest materials for use within the walkways. We are involved in planning the construction methodologies, so making sure that how we actually install the items that you require are carried out safely. And we're also involved in assessing contractors to make sure that only ones with sort of very positive health and safety records are chosen to work within your homes.
Thanks, Mark. So I think I'm going to be handing back probably to James and the others, but effectively, just to tell you that our team, the Carson Architects team, we also have other consultants working with us, XCO2, who are doing mechanical and engineering design, Elliott Wood, who are doing structural design, Trigon, who are doing fire design. So we've got a very large group of people working on the project, and there are other teams working at Lancaster West as well who are dealing with such things as fire, district heating and so on. So there's a lot of people involved in the project, and we're very glad to meet you tonight to talk about some of their initial findings and what we are going to try and do to respond to your top 10. So I think maybe over to James now.
Yes, so I'll just run through the agenda. Thanks, John. The meeting will last an hour and a half and will run as follows. James Caspel, our neighborhood director, will give a brief introduction. He'll be followed by KCA, who are working on the refurbishment of your blocks. They will go through your top 10 priorities and the initial refurbishment ideas for your blocks. They'll be followed by Janet Hall, Heat Network Engagement Manager, who will introduce the Heat Network proposals. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions and share your views. So feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat or raise your hand to ask directly. So for any late comers, a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our communication channels for residents unable to attend. I'd ask everyone to keep their microphones on mute unless they're speaking. We do encourage a camera on policy. So if you're comfortable with that, please do turn your camera on, especially when you're speaking. So without further ado, I'll hand over to James Caspel. Hey. James?
Just fell into that trap straight away, didn't I? So thank you, Boomy, and thank you to residents for joining us tonight. Almost 40 people are in this virtual room, and I'd just like to say a very warm welcome, whether you're new to engaging with us on the refurbishment or whether you're a refurb veteran. We're really glad to be able to move into this new detailed design stage with you and start the conversation as we present some of the opportunities that are now on the table. So where are we in the refurb process? So back in early 2018, there was a number of ideas days which were attended by dozens of residents to come up with what a model 21st century model estate might look like. Since then, we've been on a fundraising expedition, really, in terms of trying to find the level of funding and support from all levels of government to be able to deliver that. And I've got some really exciting exclusive news for you in a moment. Meanwhile, we were also prioritising what the main things you would like to see, based not on just the funding that's available, but should we secure greater levels of funding. And some of the great ideas that KCA are going to share with you later, hopefully you will recognise, reflect on the priorities which you told us you wanted us to prioritise on. So KCA themselves were procured with residents involved. We had over 40 residents engaged in the procurement last summer. And so we're delighted, despite the pandemic, to broadly keep things on track and move closer and closer to those final designs and ultimately the delivery of the refurbishment that you have been asking for. So we move on to the next slide, please. So why are we meeting today? So it's to develop the approach to the co-design process. So we'll give some views about how we want to engage with you, but at the same time, given the government restrictions and so on, we have to be quite creative. So really keen throughout, if people want to pop ideas and questions in the chat, they want to come on, you can put your hand up and Boomy will bring you in. So although it's quite a long meeting, we've got quite a lot of information to share with you, we really do want this to be as much of a conversation as is possible. So we'll be sharing our initial design response to your top 10s, which were developed by residents in the last sort of 18 months. Just to remind those of you that this might be new to, we have an internal refurbishment program, as well as the main block refurbishment program. And it's those main block refurbishments which we'll be talking about today. So things like windows, heating and hot water and so on and so forth. So as we discuss those opportunities, I just want to emphasise we really do want to capture your ideas, concerns, immediate feedback. And in the weeks following this meeting, Boomy's mentioned that we're going to share the video as well as the slide deck, and there'll be a summary version of the feasibility report as well, which KCA have produced. For those of you that want to look into that level of detail, that will all be made available to you. So next slide, please. So just a reminder of our vision. So we are here to deliver a 21st century model estate for social housing, making the existing buildings more energy efficient, greener and safer. In January 2020, the council made a commitment that all homes on Lancaster West should also be carbon neutral by 2030. So we're going to talk a lot about measures today which might be disruptive, but by bringing them all together into one package of works, Hopefully that will minimise disruption, because we haven't got to come back later in the decade, or even looking at the national target 2050, you know, in 15, 20 years time, to remove and do things all again. So what we're really looking to do is seize this once in a generation opportunity to put a green recovery, if you like, at the heart of the Grenfell recovery, which obviously the estate refurbishment falls under. So we want homes and the communal spaces to be co-designed with residents sensitively and collaboratively. For those of you that have been involved before, we've discussed how that might work, but what we're clearly trying to do is listen and iterate with residents, get your feedback, play that back to you, so that we move together towards something which the vast majority of residents see as a really good thing. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have some additional funding news, and for the walkways that's particularly special, because we've secured not just one additional pot of funding, but two. In terms of what that means, we're looking at over £18 million worth of additional new funding. So since we last met as a block, which was probably last summer, we've secured a significant amount of funding. That's to do two things. First and foremost is to ensure that the walkways are as safe as they can be from a fire safety point of view. There's been a lot of works that have been undertaken, and we're working with the London Fire Brigade to ensure that through the refurbishment process, we make your homes even safer. So we've secured additional funding for things like sprinklers. We're going to hear later on about fireproof glazing that potentially could replace the fire curtains, which were brought in as an emergency measure, and we've had nothing but complaints about. And equally, what you've told us is you don't like the look and feel that they give the walkways. Secondly, alluding to the policy commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030, we've secured additional funding, in this case from central government. I can't say too much now, other than that it will enable us to really reach the gold standard of the refurbishment. So it will be things, you know, like triple glazing are now on the table, whereas when we last met, that was, to be honest, an aspiration. It doesn't mean we can afford everything, so we can't afford necessarily to put 24 new lifts throughout the walkways, but it does mean that we can look to ensure that the investment we put into the walkways really does, you know, create and address a really positive refurbishment experience, and ultimately the outcome becomes the walkways which, you know, you're all proud to live at. And I think resident, when I first started, said to me that they love where they live, but they're embarrassed to bring friends to the walkways. And what we've heard loud and clear is a sense that people want to improve the walkways in a way where it doesn't feel as institutional. And I think because of where it is and the way that it's been built, a lot of the fire safety works that we've put in has sadly exacerbated that. So now we can have a look at improving the aesthetics as well as the actual fabric of the building. We're going to hear about that a little bit later on. The other slightly positive news, or very good news, I think, for any leaseholder that's in the room, is in terms of the carbon reduction measures that we've secured some additional grant funding from central government. We will not be recharging any element of those works that are in scope of that project. So bluntly, it will mean that if we go ahead and you would like us to install a triple glazed window, we will not be charging or recharging any element of that part of the works. It does mean for things out of scope, like door entry, CCTV, potentially that would still be recharged based on the original commitment that was made in terms of the council's reduction of 54% to any resident leaseholder charges. But in terms of some of the big high profile items, it does mean that this is also excellent news for leaseholders. And just to be clear, because I know there's at least one shared owner in the room with us today, that applies to shared owners. It also applies to non-resident leaseholders as well. The final thing I just wanted to say is, in terms of what you're going to hear today, are only initial ideas. Nothing is set in stone. No decisions have been made. If people aren't able to make the meeting today, that's absolutely fine. But we're thankfully in a place now where some of the initial survey information and some of the great work that KCA have been doing over recent months means we're going to have a much better idea now of what technically is possible. And crucially, we've now secured the funding to be able to deliver it. So I think that's me, and then I will hand over back to KCA.
Unmute. Thanks very much, James. As always, it's good to hear you and the ambition that that Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team have for the project. And before we go through some of the details of potential changes to the buildings, it's just reminding ourselves that, you know, we've been trying to find out what your buildings are like over the last sort of 5 months or so. And, you know, they're nearly 50 years old. The services and the fabric is definitely in need of repair and improvement, and also to meet some of the high ambitions that James just outlined there. It will require big changes, but those big changes will result in big improvements. And I think it's worthwhile just saying that to you honestly now at the beginning of the process. The bigger the changes, the more the improvements you'll benefit from. And we've tried very hard to look at areas outside your own personal homes where improvements, say, for example, to the thermal performance of the building can be made. But there are still going to be changes that will be needed, I think, inside your homes to really capitalize and make the most of the opportunities that are available. And so there's a couple of, you'll hear terminology spoken a lot. Net zero is often mentioned. And that's a really very, very high target. It means that the buildings and the energy that's pumped into them over the years will be carbon neutral in the course of its life, meaning, you know, which actually means the energy that comes into the buildings has to come from a carbon neutral source of some sort. That's very difficult to achieve. And it means that there's two ways of us dealing with it. One is to try and reuse things as much as possible. So not try and replace everything, but try and reuse or repair as much as possible. But also one really big difference will be improving the performance, the energy performance of the building. That means, so you have to use much less energy to heat your homes. And that can be achieved through improvements to the fabric, to the roof, and so on. And the benefits for you will be improved thermal comfort. So it should be easier to keep it warm and cool, summer and winter. It should give you better air quality as well. And maybe more importantly for you is much lower energy bills. If you go to the next slide, please. We've not only listened to the top 10 comments that you've been making over the last few years, but also looked at some of the ongoing sort of resident feedback, you know, things that don't work. And it's clear that plumbing, leakages, electrical problems, and also some problems with the door entry system are really kind of big issues. And it clearly shows that those systems are really getting to the end of their life and need to be replaced or certainly repaired significantly. So we've kept that in mind. And the idea is that the new services or replacements we'll make are going to hopefully last for the next decades, you know, 25, 30 or more years to come. Next slide, please. I don't know if any of you, I think some of the leaseholders are probably aware of this. You know, if you're buying or selling a property, the government requires an EPC, a performance certificate, to be made. And pretty much all buildings can have the certificate, which tells you whether it's really inefficient in terms of energy or really efficient in terms of energy. And most of the homes at Lanc West are a kind of category D. So it's not the worst, but not very good. Some of them are C, and our aspiration and our target is to make these B or better. And the image to the right-hand side is it's a thermographic image. Basically, it's a photograph of the building showing where all the heat is coming out. So the very bright areas, which you can see are the windows, are letting out most of the heat. So at least 40% of the heat from your homes is going out the windows, even when they're closed. However, some of the walls are better insulated, so less heat is lost from them. And these sort of images help us to find out where the building's not working well, and then that can be used to inform where we should try and make improvements. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, kind of repeating some of the same things. We really want to make an improvement to the energy performance, the comfort and efficiency of your homes. And there's some clear areas where we can do that. Now, James already mentioned that there are a lot of fire safety measures taking place, you know, replacement of front doors, introduction of sprinklers in the future, and so on. And those works in themselves can be quite intrusive, and will require entry into the buildings, into your homes. And if we can tie in the works that will improve the thermal performance with the works for fire safety, like sprinklers and so on, then hopefully we can keep the construction time down to a minimum. And effectively, bringing all these work together, we hope to improve the energy efficiency, improve the quality of the common spaces in the atria, and at the same time, improve the fire safety. So if we go into the next slide, please. So the top 10, we've mentioned those before. I think many of you on the call have probably been involved in feedback that have led to a list of what the top 10 priorities are for your individual blocks. They're very similar across the whole of the walkways, and some of them relate to your individual homes, which are the ones in sort of like the dark red, and some of them relate to the common areas, which are in the slightly pinker bubbles there. So just sort of listing through some of them. Areas to be addressed are windows, heating and hot water, communal electric spaces, and of just how the communal areas look and feel, which include door entry systems, the refuse storage, communal entrances, but also within the homes, things like bathrooms and kitchens are an area where, in many cases, they've been there for 40 years and it's been agreed that they can and should be replaced with your agreement. So that's something that we can bring all of that work together. If we go to the next slide, please. And the co-design process, well, if it hadn't been for COVID, we'd probably be meeting face to face many months ago. As I said earlier, that wasn't possible. So we are starting now, really. I think we had a meeting with some block representatives slightly earlier in the year, but effectively in the next few months, we should be talking like tonight with you more often about your individual homes and the things we can do in the common areas. And tonight is more of a sort of information, what we found out, what the proposals might be. As we go through the process, we'll be expecting to get feedback from you, which will help us make decisions about what's the right things to do. And also, hopefully, as we go on, there'll be some detailed design areas where you can get very involved, color of materials and choice of various other elements. If you go on to the next slide. I think, Caroline, is that time to hand over to
You're
Sean?
handing over to me now.
Okay.
So I'm going to hand over to one of our trusted team members who has remotely been getting to know your buildings very well and is going to try and explain to you what we think they are.
Thanks, John. So to prepare for the improvement works that we're doing, a big part of it has been, as John said, understanding your buildings and doing a lot of research and doing tests, confirm what your buildings are made of. We've visited the site a few times and collected a lot of original drawings and done some models, which has been really interesting. And on the right, you can see the overview of the walkways. So you can see the 3 blocks, Hurstway, Testerton and Barandon. And they're a really unique set of buildings. We think they're really beautiful. And what's really special about them is this long central communal area that runs through them, as you are all aware, and from which they get their name. And from the outside, when you look from the street, it can look quite jumbled. It's not very regular like other buildings, but it's quite repetitive when you look at it. It's actually a series of bays, which you can see in that little colored diagram at the top of the page. So on the next slide, please. You can see how these bays are arranged next to each other. So they're arranged in length. And on the diagram on the right, you can see how the homes that make up these bays. Each of the colors represent a different little home type. And you can see how they interlock and are arranged around that central communal area. And on the images below on the right, you can see how they're stacked and arranged as well. So you can see the lower levels of 3-bed homes. These are duplex homes or 2-story flats. There's a layer of flats above that. That's a single story. And then on the top floor, there's a mixture of flats and duplexes. And these create the little light wells where the roof lights are that bring the light down to that communal space below. So what does this all mean? It means that we can use the highly repetitive design of the existing building to find a common solution. And this brings down the cost of the upgrade work that we're doing, and then it delivers value. So that's to you, the residents, and to Lancaster West. So next slide, please. And these sketches show another aspect of the building we've looked at. So this is looking at your journey home from the street to your front door and how this can be improved as part of the works. So these sketches illustrate that experience of that journey. So, and what you're familiar with. So common obstacles like the ramps at the courtyards, or the staircases inside that bring you to the upper stories, and the walkways, which are quite narrow, and the steps at the threshold of each entrance. We want to discuss these because we think it's key to get the communal area upgrade right, and things like accessibility, making it easier for people with physical impairments to enter the building and get home is a good thing. And also improving things like wayfinding, so it makes it easier for you to get deliveries or for a friend to visit, and that includes work like signage, improving the signage. Other things that we're looking at, which we want to discuss, are improving the acoustics, improving the doors and the windows. The space is going to help with that. And another item would be looking at the lighting, so it's a much more pleasant and welcoming space on your way home. And on the next slide, please. So moving on to the upgrade works that John outlined and the principles of, in terms of fire safety, this is a key part of the works. And there's a number of, currently exists a number of measures that are being developed. There's an expert team working with this with Lancaster West, and which we are part of. So outlined here, some of the packages of this work. The first that's shown here is upgrading the roof lights. So on the image on the right, you can see those roof lights, and that's to enable smoke to escape if there was a case of fire. And these will automatically open. The second is installing sprinklers in everyone's homes. And another one is installing smoke detectors in everyone's homes and in the common areas as well. Another element is installing new windows, fireproof glazing windows for kitchens and bathrooms that open onto the common areas, and also replacing the entrance doors, which is already happening. And lastly, to improve the thermal performance of the buildings, to keep the heat into the building, reducing heat loss, we will be upgrading the fabric, and part of that will be using insulation, and this insulation will be A1 or A2 rated, which is the highest classification for building materials. So on the next slide, please, you can see what these essential works mean to your individual home in the walkways. So on the diagram on the right, you can see a typical 1-bedroom flat as an example. So you can see that we'll have to install sprinklers in everyone's home. So each of those sprinkler heads will be in each of the rooms. A new ceiling will go in to hide that new run of sprinklers. And this will require a couple of days' work by builders. Any windows that open on to the common areas, which are highlighted there in the darker pink, these will need to be replaced with fireproof glazing, and they're also going to be fixed closed. So previously there was ventilation, it could happen through that space, but that won't be allowed in the future. Similarly, the doors need to be replaced, which is, again, is currently happening. And consequently, on the next slide, can you see the next slide, please? Oh yeah, there it is.
Oh, is that not coming up?
Yeah, no, it came up. Sorry, it froze for me. So we're going to use this opportunity to install these ceilings, to also install a new ventilation system. So up to 72% of homes have a window into the common areas, and as that window is going to be closed, we think it's an opportunity to bring a new ventilation system in that will help reduce things like condensation and mold coming from bathrooms and kitchens. And this is called an MVHR system. What MVHR means is mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So what that simply does is brings fresh air in from the outside. It exhausts stale air to the outside, but it recovers the heat from it, which means that you pay less in fuel bills overall. The added benefit, as I said, it reduces condensation. And all you'll notice is that in the ceilings, you'll have little vents that you can see on the image at the bottom. And on the next slide, please. Another part of these essential works is that loaded? Oh, there we go. Again, we've mentioned already new windows on the external faces of the buildings. They're going to be triple glazed windows and new balcony doors as part of that. There's going to be new low energy lighting in the ceilings in all homes. There's going to be new door entry systems, and there's going to be upgrading of the electrics as well to make them up to standard. And lastly, there's going to be the removal of the gas supply currently as part of the fire safety improvements, and these will be replaced with new high power electric hobs. And on the next slide, going to talk about now the common areas and how we're going to treat the common areas. So these are the spaces that run through the center of the block. You can see it's there in the middle of the diagram on the right, and you can see the roof lights that bring light to those spaces below. So we are looking at ways that we can wrap the building in insulation, and you can see that marked out in yellow, and in red you can see where we're going to heat the building. So the homes are obviously going to be heated. And in this option on the right, we've looked at we could heat the central atrium space as well. This would be using low energy technology, so it would be things like solar panels that would contribute to this. And the advantage of this is that we wouldn't have to insulate those communal area walls, so any walls that face between the flats and that common area. And what it means would be that the temperature in both spaces, the common area and the homes, would be roughly the same. And from our analysis, this is suggested it's the best way to treat this space because it reduces heat loss from your homes and it minimizes disruption as we're not having to insulate those walls that face that space. However, we've looked at other options, and on the second option, on the next slide, you can see it's very similar. It's got a new roof light like the first option. If you go back one slide, please. And yeah, that's the one there. It's quite similar to the first one. We're insulating on the external walls, insulating the basement as well. We're introducing some insulation in the common area walls. That would probably be cavity fill insulation, which is a little less disruptive than a full lining. And similar to the first option, we're introducing a new roof light. And then the third option we've looked at is whether we would return to keeping the building like its original state as a cold space. So that image coming up. There we go. So the blue indicates the cold areas. This requires a lot more insulation. We'd have to wrap those walls. It means we have to extend the walkways, the access walkways, as a result of that. And so there'll be a lot more disturbance involved in this piece of work. So at the moment, option one is looking like the best option. And over to Caroline now.
Thanks, Sean. Just to check with everyone, can everyone hear me clearly? I'm a bit concerned that we have some connectivity issues from our side, so I do apologise. So I'm going to talk hopefully quite quickly about the thermal fabric improvements that we're looking at for your buildings. And
Caroline, you're a bit crackly. Do you want to come and use my one? We're at different ends of the office, but I can come off my machine. I'm the same, aren't we? Oh wait.
You also seem to be quite crackly.
Would it help if I share screen?
How are we to you, Bundy?
I can hear John clearly. I think it's just you, Caroline.
Okay.
Try turning your video off maybe and see if that works initially.
Yeah.
I do apologise, everyone.
It's absolutely fine.
Okay, we'll try this now. So we are working closely with the Together Estate architects. As John mentioned, there's a team of architects working across the different lots on the estate. And we do meet very often to discuss our different approaches to your buildings and to make sure that we're not replicating work unnecessarily. There obviously will be a number of common themes that stretch across the estate. It's important that we discuss those. But it is also important to note that the buildings across the estate are very varied in nature. They're, many are from different periods and they're, a varied construction. So what might suit one building well could be totally impractical for another. And it is important that we find the right solution.
Caroline, sorry to interrupt. Is it possible for you to swap, positions with John, just because we can hear John clearly, but not Caroline? Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll
apologize. Give Caroline 2 minutes to just, swap, if that's okay.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks, guys. I might. Sean, can you share? Because I think that's probably going to be the easiest thing here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
So if you have any questions about the presentation, or if you have any ideas, please just put your hand up, read out, or put your comments in the chat, and I'll read them out, okay? Giuseppe, you have a question?
Yes, please, since you ask an opportunity to ask a question. The
Yeah.
question is, when you're gonna put the sprinkler system inside the flat, the homes, they need to lower the ceiling, correct?
That's right. Sean, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, they do. So we're looking at a drop ceiling of about 120 millimeters. So that's about that much. And yeah, it will, every ceiling in all the rooms will have to have that to hide the sprinkler system.
There's any other way to do it? Because our ceilings are already 2.30 meters low or high. So by reducing by 12 centimeters, that is going to take to 2.18. So it's going to become like claustrophobic, the home.
Yes, I'm aware of the section heights. Yeah, we have looked at other ways of doing it, but it seems the only effective way of doing it is by the ceilings.
It can't be much lower. It'll be on top of your head when you walk in. You'll be touching it with your finger.
Yeah,
exactly. What you want to live in a box?
Yeah, because it's much too low now. I can already touch it now.
Yeah,
so
exactly. We don't want to live in a box.
So, Sean, can we clarify if it's 12 centimeters or 12 millimeters?
12 centimeters.
It'll be much too low because it's very low now.
If I could just come in, please, Boomy, just to reassure residents. So we're already putting in suspended ceilings in the open house properties of 417 Barandon that people have visited. So in all the tenanted refurbished homes, they already have lower ceilings. What we are doing is a number of sprinkler pilots, and they should be ready hopefully in 2 to 3 months' time, which will show all the pipework that needs to come in, and then some of the options. So Giuseppe, you asked in terms of options, there is potentially an option where you could box it in. And obviously for leasehold properties such as your own, we would only obviously want to come in and do a minimal level of disturbance to those sorts of properties. Also, I think later on tonight, KCA will be talking about the Testerton Walk pilot, which I believe will also include sprinklers as well. So I just want to assure people that you'll get the opportunity to come and have a look. But for those of you that are living, and I know some of you are in our refurbished properties currently, it's that same ceiling height.
I do apologise for that that brief pause there, guys, whilst we sort ourselves out. We've had a bit of a technical issue earlier this afternoon. So I'll jump back in if that's okay now, Bunmi. So we were talking about the finding the right solutions for your buildings. And we're talking about the fact that we're often working quite closely with the other estate architects, but it is very important that we hone in what is specific about your building. So as you know, your buildings have got very dynamic facades. The Walkways buildings have got many projecting and recessed elements, and it does result in a number of the potential for a number of complex junctions for anything which is kind of externally mounted to the facade. So that's key consideration for us, and this is not the situation with a number of the other buildings across the estate. So we're going to see different solutions coming forward for different buildings, no doubt, and I think it is important to acknowledge this from the outset. So there are a variety of different elements in your buildings, the roofs, the windows, the walls, the floors, which could be upgraded to improve their thermal performance. And we've been collating a number of different options for how we might improve these particular packages. And it's really important that we develop all of these options with you into the future. It's really important that we acknowledge there's a careful balance that needs to be struck between the long-term benefits of these measures and the short-term upheaval that might be required. We want to give you full clarity
on each and every option to enable you to make clear choice. And just quickly, long term would be the improvements to your home environments and your physical comfort, your reduction in your energy bills, and the improved lifespan of your buildings, versus the short term, which is more about capital cost measures, the necessary duration of the works, placement of temporary works, and the levels of disruption, potential need for temporary rehousing. Next slide, please, Sean. So just to hone in on the specific packages themselves, so roofs, insulating the roofs will reduce heat loss and heat gain, and there are other opportunities available to us when we look at the roofs. So we'd like to look at ways of improving biodiversity and introducing green energy such as PV panels, which will help to reduce your energy bills. With the windows account for probably the largest thermal improvement, fabric improvement in your buildings, because they account for such a large amount of the surface area of your buildings. So changing these to airtight triple glazed frames will have a huge impact. And then similarly, upgrading balconies with new waterproofing, insulation and rainwater goods will help to, I think, deal with a lot of the leakage problems that John mentioned earlier, and we're acutely aware that you guys suffer with at this stage. Also with the floors, so this is showing the underside of the slabs in the garage spaces and also the adjacent walls. So insulating those, the underside of those slabs, exposed slabs and walls to reduce heat transfer to the unheated garages below will be really important. I think it's worth noting now as well that all of the new insulation options that are currently being explored are A1, A2 rated, which is the lowest risk material rating under the fire regulations. And what we want to do is explain all of the different systems that we're looking at, you know, with full clarity to you at every stage through this process, so you can feel comfortable that what we're proposing is, you know, the most safe solution. And we're working with Mark Allen, who introduced himself at the beginning of this meeting. Final thing to mention, wall insulation, which we'll come on to in a second, to improve thermal performance by either insulating from within or wrapping the outside face of the building in insulation. So next slide, please, Sean. So we want to use a variety of tools to communicate different options for your buildings to you. And the model here shows a cross section of your buildings. On the right side of the model, you've got the existing situation. And on the left, we've shown options for insulating your buildings alongside many of the essential work packages that Sean mentioned earlier. We set the model up so that you can make a direct comparison between the existing fabric and other measures. And next slide, Sean. Thanks. And it's also worth mentioning that since the model has two sides, we've been able to test a couple of different scenarios. So the previous slide showed the kind of the more internal facing insulation measures. This is more about the external wall insulation option. And it's also, the large model is really helpful to communicate the very three-dimensional nature of your buildings and how different material measures will impact your internal configuration and the external facades. Finally,
Caroline, can you hear me now? Can you hear me clearly now? Good, I'm back in the call, so if you need me, just shout. Okay, carry on.
Thank you. And the bigger, I think it's also helpful to communicate to you how certain thermal improvements in your properties will help your neighbours and vice versa, and they will improve acoustics. So it's a bit more of a kind of a bigger picture. There is sort of knock-on effects for your direct neighbours. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to give a very brief introduction to the way in which we assess how well your building performs thermally, and with every proposed thermal enhancement that we're looking at. So John showed the thermography photo earlier in the presentation. Just to revisit that, that obviously shows how heat escapes from your buildings at the moment. So the white areas are where we're getting a lot of heat loss, and the darker areas are where it's actually better insulated, it's performing better. All materials have a thermal value that contributes to the overall U value of a building element. Very broadly speaking, the better insulated a structure is, the lower the U value. So low good, high bad, meaning it will be better at keeping the building warmer in winter and cooler in summer. So as you can see, looking at that thermography image there, high U value, which is up at the kind of the white and the yellows, that shows a lot of heat escaping. A low U value is where we have very little heat escaping, so it's performing much better. Your current buildings, the wall build-up, you've got brick outer face with a cavity and a blockwork inner face, which has got a mortar coat on the inside. Now, the U value that this is achieving at the moment is 0.82, which is, it's okay, it's not great, and there are things that we can do to really help improve that. So what we're wanting to do is bring this down to around about 0.3 U value to meet with energy reduction targets that have been set. And it's worth mentioning, it's not just about walls. We have to assess the U values of all elements within your building's envelope. That's the whole, that's the roof, the walls, the windows, floors, everything, to get the overall energy consumption we can expect to see over the course of the year. And this is one of the ways that we will demonstrate that we are reducing carbon. Next slide, please, Sean. So we've used an example of clothing to try and communicate to you the broad I think, or the broad ideas about how we might go about insulating your buildings. So if for a moment you imagine that different ways of insulating your walls are very similar to the different layers of clothing that we all wear. So if you suppose that your buildings behave like a jumper, which is working relatively well at the moment, but you'd rather be a lot warmer. So one option would be to wear a thermal vest underneath your jumper, and another option would be to wear a coat over your jumper. So if we go down to the next slide. So as you can see, our buildings, we can put the thermal vest on the inside, or we can put the coat on the outside. And different insulations will behave in different ways at different locations within the building. Now, if we go to the next slide, Sean, it's worth mentioning that both of these measures are working really well. They are improving the overall performance of your buildings. However, at the moment, the internal wall insulation option is maybe just performing that little bit better. There are other considerations that we have to take into account here. And it's worth, I think, mentioning that it's maybe a little bit kind of guided on the internal wall insulation side, because the actual insulation we've looked at there is actually really high performing insulation. But because of its location within the building, it's actually really adequately reflecting heat, really performing well and reflecting heat back into the space. The external wall insulation that we're showing here is maybe not performing quite so well on paper, because it's supported on a system of rails, and as we all know, metal conducts heat really well. So this is what's known as cold bridging. So if you put a sort of metal grid on the outside of the building, then these are the locations that the heat can start to escape from your building and the cold can start to come in. So we can look at other systems for those rails. At the moment, I think the metal system is predominantly the best, because it's meeting with all the fire safety regulations. We just need to make sure that everything we do is fully compliant with the A1, A2 ratings. It's really important to note that these are just two options that we've been looking at. There's a myriad of different options out there, and we've been interrogating a number of different solutions. This is just a kind of a starting point in the conversation. We are not sitting here tonight kind of say we want to go with this one, we want to push this one ahead with you, but it is probably the two kind of, I guess, the two front runners, and it's also the two which have got quite a lot of difference in terms of their application and what it will mean for you in terms of installing them within your buildings. So next slide. So the other areas for consideration, it's not just about what it means for the long term, but going back to that short term analysis. So, what does it mean in terms of access into your units? For the internal wall insulation, we have to gain access into your units to install it, albeit It is a relatively quick installation process, as we understand. And as we've mentioned previously, the essential works packages, we will need to gain access to your units. So there is a potential for installing some of these measures as part of that. There is also a very small impact on the internal areas. Now it's only 3 centimetres that we're looking at extending that internal wall out to accommodate this insulation. So it is really highly performing. I think the other thing to mention about the external wall insulation is that we don't have to gain access into your units. That's, there's a huge benefit to that. But at the same time, it is quite a lengthy installation process. And it does, we believe, require scaffold. It also does have some implications for your balcony spaces. So if we start to build out outside of the wall, then we're starting to build into those spaces. So there would be some loss of area on your balconies. We're trying to, I think, pitch out all of the implications for all of these different materials at the moment, but we need to obviously develop these in conversation with yourselves. Next slide, please. And I think this is just to kind of capture the chief pros and cons as we understand them at this stage, but will require further development with you. So internal wall insulation, fast installation, doesn't require scaffolding, doesn't impact on window size, balcony area or balcony access, but it requires 100% of access to deliver the full benefit to your buildings. So if we don't get access into some units, then we effectively have a kind of a break in that thermal measure. It requires additional intrusive work for the leaseholders and those who have already had refurbishment works undertaken. And there is, as previously mentioned, a small impact on floor area. The external wall insulation, as comparative, does not require access into your homes, and it doesn't reduce your internal floor area, but it does require scaffolding, reduces balcony areas. The length of time and the method of installation can be disruptive. That needs to be taken into account, and it will require careful coordination with the externally mounted services and the shape of your buildings as well. Next slide, please. So just moving on to the roof measures, this is a bit more straightforward. The green roofs, unfortunately, we've explored green roofs in a lot of detail with our structural engineers, and we do actually think that it may be unlikely due to the loading capacity of your roof decks that we'd be able to accommodate green roofs on these particular buildings. But we do, however, think that with a new parapet upstand, and the parapet upstand is effectively just extending the wall of the building up. It means that it's safer for any of the operatives that go up on top of your roofs, because they don't have to wear any man-safe equipment to stop them from falling over the edges. So yeah, the parapet upstand could support a network of rails that you can mount PV panels on, and that will obviously contribute to energy demand into your buildings. The atrium roof lights, I think Sean already touched upon this, replacing those with double, triple glazed, thermally enhanced and airtight system solutions to improve the thermal capacity of the atrium spaces. And just a final point here, the heating demand, we believe, will be reduced by roughly 1/4 with the new skylights and by 1/3 with all of the above measures incorporated. Next slide, please.
Caroline,
oh, sorry, Tommy. Yeah.
I have a question from Abbas. Could you please explain more about loss of floor space through internal insulation? Caroline or John? Do you want to respond?
Yeah, yes, Bunmi. I think what Caroline was explaining there, that imagine if you're in your homes and you're looking at the window, very often there's a radiator on that wall. Sometimes there's a kitchen, but if there's a radiator there, then we would be adding about 1 inch or 3 centimeters of material onto the wall in terms of depth to improve its insulation. So if a radiator was hanging there, then the radiator would be taken off. We put some insulation and plasterboarding on it, and then the radiator would be replaced. In some cases, there's a kitchen on the outside wall, and in those cases, we may not bother doing that at all. It may not be necessary because the kitchen itself is already providing a little bit more insulation than a standard wall. So obviously, the more insulation we put on the better it performs. But the calculations that us and our team, XCO2, have done have worked out that the biggest improvement will come from windows. The second biggest improvement will come from warming up the atria areas. The third biggest improvement overall will come from insulating underneath the building where the car park and the garage is. The next area of improvement is the roof, and so on and so forth. So actually what's left is the small amounts of wall that are left. They will make a difference, but not quite as much as the others. So that's why we think only a few centimeters or an inch of insulation may be enough to make enough of a difference. I don't know, did I answer that well enough?
Yes, you did. I also have another question on EWI. Would the external wall insulation have a benefit to the aesthetics of the wall?
I think if it was a really pretty or attractive fabric, it could do. But it's like anything, you know, if you like yellow bricks, yellow brick walls are nice. If you like blue bricks are all nice. There are different systems out there. I think what you can say is adding external wall insulation, and then you have to clad that, it will change the building significantly. And even if we used a brick cladding that was very similar to the current building, it would still change its appearance quite a bit. So whether you like it or not, that's personal preference. And I wouldn't like to say that you can't guarantee something's attractive. It's more that's down into whoever's looking at it, I think.
Okay. Another question from Giuseppe. When you say extra intrusive work for leaseholders, that means extra charge with internal insulation. Is that right?
No, I think James made it clear earlier that the work that will improve the thermal performance of the building, we have funding for that, so I don't think that charge is going to be passed on to leaseholders. So there would be no cost. It's just we need access to the homes to do work inside the homes. It's rather like the sprinklers. The sprinkler system, I think, will be, I'm not sure who pays for that, but that can only be done by going into the homes. But in terms of thermal improvements, I believe, James, that you said that they would be funded effectively by Lanc West rather than leaseholders.
Or by the council, absolutely. So Giuseppe, just to reassure you, we couldn't charge even if we wanted to, and of course we don't, in terms of any enabling works to do internal installation, if that's the route that the residents wish to go down. It does, however, mean considerably more disruption than an external wall insulation approach. And obviously the other thing it does is assumes that we can get 100% access for it to work on a building wide level. So I just think it's proportionate to put that up, that there would be disruption for either option, and there are pros and cons to both as well to consider.
Yeah, James.
Sorry,
I was just saying, I think James has made a very good point that all of the works will have some disruption, and if we do them all separately, it could take a very long time and be really inconvenient for everyone. So what we're trying really hard to do is to find out which ones can be done at the same time in the same place. Mm-hmm. And for example, we started the project off by trying to find ways of doing everything outside the home, so no changes would be needed to inside the homes. And equally, we've tried to find ways of doing everything just inside the home, so you don't have to have scaffolding on the outside the building. And we're trying to find a way of basically trying to slim down the time it takes to do the work and maybe zone it. So if we are coming in, maybe we should focus on just doing internal works rather than outside. But that's where it will to be developed.
Right. Abbas, I think that answers your question about disruption for leaseholders. And Abbas would also like to know what the disruption would be for people who have already had, refurb. I presume this is internal refurb.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. For example, there is a program of complete refurbishment going on. And obviously, once all of that really good work is done, I think some of the apartments are looking really nice. We would be very reluctant to go in and then take away work that's already been done. And so I think in the end, the chances are some work will be able to be done or will have to be done everywhere. But other work, we might be able to do it in some places where it's suitable and not in others where it's going to be, let's say, disproportionate. It wouldn't make a big enough improvement to justify the disruption. So if you've just, if there's a brand new kitchen gone in, why would we take that out to add a little bit of insulation? There's maybe other ways of achieving the overall benefits. And because your apartments, although there are repeat plans, they're different. So the ones at the top of the building are very reliant on the roofs being insulated to keep them from getting too cold. And similarly, the ones at the bottom of the building rely on the garage insulation to be done to keep them warm. So different homes maybe need different works, and some of it's inside and some of it's outside. So in the end, it's probably going to be a bit of a balancing act. There'll be some places where we won't do everything, but we can still make a big improvement with other measures.
Thanks, John. Effie would like to know how insulation will benefit acoustics between flats, and I presume between the flat and the communal walkway.
So Bunmi, I think that James mentioned the pilot 411 test, and we'll come on to explain that in a bit more detail. But we are trying to find ways to evidence how much of an impact the insulation measures will have on acoustics between your flats, but also between your flats and the atrial spaces, because as we understand it, a lot of the noise reverberation through those spaces is an issue. So again, we need to think about it's noise. It's also noise that's transmitted through structure. We need to get a clearer picture. So we're planning to undertake a series of acoustic tests to understand how the existing building works, but then we're going to start to test as we test these measures through the pilot works.
Right.
Caroline, it's generally speaking, if we add, say, for example, in the new refurbishment works, when you add new plasterboard lining to the walls and make sure it's nicely sealed, that will generally improve acoustics. Putting in triple glazing to the outside rather than the current single glazing will definitely, improve acoustics. Putting double glazing or triple glazing to the atrium side should also improve acoustics. So, and also, I think it has to be said that because of the fire changes, the fire proof of the glazing, we will have to introduce ventilation systems, which means you don't have to rely on opening windows to ventilate. And once again, that can help with acoustics. It also has its own acoustic challenges because there's a little motor that might run, but we need to make sure that that's isolated. So, but generally speaking, the measures should improve acoustics in general.
Yes. So Effie is also put in the chat. I presume this is just a comment that there is also a big issue of noise between flats. So it's not just between flats and hallways.
Yes,
absolutely. And so that's between the structure, is it, Bunmi, as we understand it? It's from flat to flat, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think just to go back to the pilot, and I will come on to this in a second, but the pilot, because it's actually spread over 2 floors, and the intervening floor between the 2 levels is the same construction as it is between your flats, will be able to, I think, really test different measures, different acoustic improvement measures in that particular location. So that's it's a huge bonus having a duplex to test in.
Thanks, Caroline. James, I think this is a question for you. At present, what is the estimated cost to leaseholders for all applicable refurbishments?
Yeah, no, it's a logical question and one we're asked quite often. So I think up until probably about a month ago, leaseholders were looking at about £30,000-ish worth of investment, of which they would be charged no more than 15,000 if they're a resident leaseholder or a shared owner. And I can see 2 shared owners in the room now, so apologies before for only saying there's one. Now what we're looking at is a significantly increased level of investment for a leaseholder property, probably about 40 to 45,000. But because we can't charge for certain elements, so the windows is the big ticket item, which on some of the larger properties you're probably looking at north of 15,000. It leaves us with very little we could charge for. To give examples, it would be things like door entry systems, maybe communal flooring in terms of entrances to blocks, CCTV. So I don't want to give a definite figure, but I know that people will want at least a range. And I would be expecting that range over a 5-year period to be around £5,000 to £10,000 now. and that will be for resident leaseholders at least. And there will still be a range of payment options available as well. So a lot of it depends, what residents choose to do. And what we don't want to do is make any decisions. And our pros in terms of the insulation argument, the other thing is with the internals is about that finite pot, that budget, we would have to come and make good all that disruption. So if I have to take Giuseppe's kitchen to bits and put in the internal wall insulation, then it's your pot of money ultimately that needs to come from. So there are trade-offs in terms of the range of options that we're exploring, and that will also impact in terms of the final cost to leaseholders. We'll try and do things as well to try and combine costs. So obviously once the scaffolding's up, if we do go down an external wall insulation approach or a hybrid approach, we would do the windows and the EWI together to try and reduce leaseholder costs. So it's not as clear cut as saying there will be no charge, but as a result of the grant funding, leaseholders will be getting a significant improvement on the value of their home, and crucially for those that live there, the quality of life. So in 3 to 5 years' time, I would be expecting the walkways to be a place that is talked about up and down the country.
And James, it's probably also worth pointing out that at the moment the energy bills are quite high, and that's even with a lot of basically supplement coming from the local authority. So although it might not be 5, I think it'd be closer maybe to 10 years that if we do all of the measures, the amount of savings just on the energy bills will offset some of those leaseholder costs. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. The more we do, the cheaper those bills will be, and therefore sort of maybe in your daily budget, it balances things off a little bit.
Thanks, John. Another question from Michelle. The walkways are separate blocks, but also joined and clear each other. Would any changes have to have a general consensus between all blocks, or can they look different?
I think, Bonmi, I think it depends what we do. I think at the moment, it doesn't look like we need to do external wall insulation and therefore change the outside too much. So maybe the outside will remain more similar, but certainly things like improving entrances and also improving the decor and the finishes inside. I think there's definite areas where if residents want there to be a difference between different parts of the building, then that's something that could be accommodated. And in fact, that's, I think, where part of the exciting part of the co-design process can be there, where people in different blocks may have a different view on what they'd like to see things look like. So I think there can be definitely subtle differences between things, but it wouldn't be mandatory, but it is certainly an option. Sure.
We're just going to take one more question and carry on. Isabella would like to know if you're reducing existing living space. I presume that's the IWI option where, we're sort of, feeding into living area.
Yeah, so basically, even with the new refurbishment works that are going on in the apartments, currently the partitions between rooms are very, very small, and using kind of up-to-date modern solutions, those walls become thicker. So inevitably some area is lost in the flats. And I know that's not ideal. So inner wall insulation, as I said, if we use very high performing insulation and take away the current plaster before we put a new one on, you may lose, well, it's certainly less than a square meter of area in an apartment. But at the same time, outside wall insulation will also affect space. So for example, your balconies will get much narrower, and even in some cases, there may not be quite the room to have the size of door you currently have. So I guess it's obvious that adding anything onto either the inside or the outside of the building may impact on internal space. So we're trying to look for the ways that will have the least amount of impact on area.
Thanks, John. I think we can just carry on for now, and I'll let you know if there are any more questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Bonmi. And apologies, I just got thrown off of another computer, so I'm not having much success tonight. Sean, can we go down to the windows, please? Thanks. Okay, great. So you've obviously already been consulted upon window options previously. So all of our progress work to date has been using this information as a starting point. I think it's really important that we communicate that. Certainly the windows, as previously mentioned, they do offer the biggest opportunity to improve the thermal performance of your homes. And we also want to make them easier to operate for you. We want, to improve the look of the windows, because obviously the old windows they've had their life now. And also improving safety and security is going to be critical. So sorry, Sean, can we get the next slide? Just to recap on the Windows pilot 2019, we weren't actually involved in this, but we've got a lot of feedback information from James and Bunmi and the team, and as I mentioned, we've plotted that out within the particular options that we're looking at the moment, and obviously taking good note of the color preferences that you guys expressed, and the key areas, so ease of cleaning, safety and security, and the thermal capacity of those. Next slide. So just to recap on opening options, as the outward opening side hung window is pretty common in the UK, but as we probably all know, it's very difficult to safely clean from within the home, especially at height. So the other kind of two options that we're really focusing in on at the moment, there's the top hung reversible, which is an outward opening profile. I think the ones that were installed in Barandon were actually the tilt and turn, which I'll come on to in a second. This top hung reversible, it does have some benefits to it because it's outward opening. It actually does allow for the curtain line or the blind line to kind of remain interrupted in your properties, and what the way the mechanism operates is that it kind of flips and reverses on itself, so you can clean the outside pane from the inside of your units. The one thing to be said here is that it can be quite cumbersome to operate, so we need to be really cautious. And I think the premise is that we're wanting to get a series of samples made up, which are the actual size of your windows, get them maybe installed in the baseline entrance, so you can all come down, have a bit of a play around with each of the different systems. You've obviously already done that within Barandon, but it's just important that we revisit some of these conversations about the different window manufacturers. The inward opening tilt and turn, as I mentioned, that's what you've got on Barandon, open from the top and secured to allow additional ventilation. So that's the image just on the left there. And they could also be opened inwards fully if required. And that's how we enable easy cleaning. It does have the knock-on effect over it kind of interrupts your curtain or your blind line. So that's another thing to consider. Next slide, please. So these are the three different manufacturers
Caroline,
we're looking at. Yeah, sorry,
I quickly interrupt just on the previous slide. Helena would like to know why sliding windows, I guess, is not an option.
I think we've had to discount it. We are not finding nearly the right types of thermal efficiency for these sliding windows. I mean, we should plot that out as an alternative here when we have future discussions with you, just so you've got it as a comparative exercise. We have been in touch with window manufacturers. The one thing to mention here as well, Bunmi, is that the way that your balcony doors work, we think we can only accommodate a slider there, because to put a side hung casement window in there would have too much of a negative impact on your balcony spaces. So at the moment, we're focusing in on sliding doors for your balconies, but opening casements for your ribbon windows that sit at a higher level. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thanks, Caroline.
Perfect. So these are the three manufacturers we're looking at. So there's Rainers, there's Velfac, and there's Ideal Combi, which is in Barandon. So the Rainers, it's coming down to a bit of a two-horse race at the moment, because at the moment the Rainers is quite expensive. It's not getting the right thermal values, and it's got quite a thick frame. We think that for these buildings, because you've actually got quite nice fine windows, it would be quite good to go with another manufacturer who actually has quite nice fine thin windows, because it will replicate that original kind of aesthetic and design intent for your buildings. But obviously we want to hear what you think about that. That's only our kind of understanding. The Velvac is on price point, as we understand it at the moment, coming in quite, it's coming in the cheapest. It's also got the highest U value. So, the lowest U value. So it's got the highest thermal performance. And one thing to mention here, the Ideal Combi, as a comparative, it's just an aluminium frame. So both externally and internally, you've got aluminium facings. With the Velvac V200, you've got what is known as a composite window. So it's got an aluminium outer external frame, so it's all weatherproof. And then on the inside of the window, facing into your apartment, you've got a timber internal frame, which we're eager to hear your thoughts on that, because some of us feel like it might be a bit nicer to have that in a domestic setting, but obviously it's probably down to as much personal choice, but we'd be eager to hear what many of you think on that. And then the final one, the Ideal Combi, so not quite as well performing as the Velvac thermally. It's got a similar frame profile, again, full aluminium frame, and it's slightly dearer than the Velvac is coming in at the moment. Next slide, please.
Caroline, yes, new question from Michelle.
That's fine.
Will the new windows cut the glare from the sun?
We are looking at dealing with the solar glare. Is it to do? Can I just ask? Is it to do with heat gain, or is it to do with glare?
Michelle, do you want to expand on your question? Michelle.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I live in Testerton, and my windows face Barandon, so I get the sun all day. So it's very hot during the day in the summer, and I get the sun right through all day. So it's the glare is quite strong.
Mm.
We can look at dealing with this through glass specification, but I think, John, our recent discussions, especially about solar gain, which is when obviously the sun comes through your windows and it heats up the space from within. We are looking at whether there might need to be some solar shading, which is adopted on the buildings.
Yeah, that's right. So Michelle, I think I think your flat and I think many others do get a lot of overheating, and it's because the windows are very generous in size and they're full width. So when the sun's shining on them, you are really going to overheat. So the new triple glazing, and also the fact that we will have to introduce a small ceiling void to hide away the sprinkler pipes, that will mean that the windows will get a little bit smaller in height, and also being triple glazing, they kind of reflect back some of the light, so less daylight comes through. I think you'll still have very bright interiors from a daylight point of view, but as Caroline was saying, I think there is going to be the possibility of introducing external shading devices. So that could be, for example, louvers that you could either bring down in those really bright times of the year and take back up again. I think there are things we're going to do some calculations and see what's going to be most effective, but we are aware that that's one of the problems. So I think it's one of the problems we should try and address.
Thank you, Michelle. We also, I'm going to be putting out a call for volunteers later on, because we need to understand more about the way that your occupied homes work. Especially, we've had a lot of feedback about overheating at the upper levels of the building, and obviously a lot of that is to do with solar gain. So BTS, who are the Build Test Solutions, who are the guys who are coming in and testing a lot of this, installing a lot of the test sensors, will be able to plot out against maybe the type of weather that we're having, the outside temperature, the amount of sunlight hours that we're getting per day. They can start to plot out quite clearly how that affects your apartments, your flats.
Can I also ask a question, Caroline, while you are here on Windows? I also live next door to Michelle and 303 Testerton Walk. So have you learned lessons from Grenfell fire? Because when they fit the new windows into those, the frames didn't fit properly, and they insulated with a material which was inflammable. I have attended the inquiry and I have learned that from there. So if the frames are not proper and they don't fit in, it is not fireproof. So can you just comment on that?
We will be we'll be looking at approved installers for installing all of these systems. They come with system warranties, and all of the materials that we're looking to install with the windows will meet all of the requisite fire regulations. The problem that was encountered on Grenfell is that they weren't installed correctly, as you say. So as long as we are clearly plotting out exactly, exactly how they need to be installed on the building, and all of the materials that are sometimes used for padding out are in line with the building regulations, there won't be any danger of that happening.
Yeah, and Caroline, also, I think Mushtaq, we're very aware of the problems in the past, and watching the work on site, inspecting the work on site is going to be an important part. Because it's one thing us drawing something or specifying it, but that needs to be done properly on site as well. And James and the Lanc West team are very keen to make sure that there are specialists, not even just the architects, but in addition to the architects, to have other people inspecting the work on site to make sure that it is done properly, it is fitted properly, and the right materials are being used in accordance with the specifications. So I don't want to make any special promises now, but I think we're all aware of the mistakes of the past, and I think we're all determined not to make them again.
I could just add to that, please, John. So one of the things we're looking to do, Mushtaq, is train residents in terms of what's called retrofit, which is basically just a posh word for improving the energy performance of existing homes. Because you're quite right, and we've found elsewhere, even where we've got double glazing in some of our blocks, that it hasn't been fitted very well. So in terms of our low energy home at Verity Close, which I know a number of you have come to visit, and we'll be doing some proper comms on that in the next couple of weeks, we took the windows out and we actually trained the operatives in how to fit windows, not just properly in terms of building standards, but far beyond that, to make sure that they were fit for purpose from a long-term point of view, rather than just saying, oh, we've fitted the windows. And that's where all the stuff like the thermal images that you've seen today will help, and we can share those with residents before, during and after, to give as much assurance as is needed that we're looking not just to meet building regulations, but far surpass them.
Learning the lessons from the past is one of the very important lessons.
Absolutely, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mushtaq.
Thanks. Just one more comment from Helen. Aren't the hinges in the suggested windows, the options, a weakness long term?
So sorry, but I mean the
hinges.
The hinges. Sorry, it's cutting out again for me. My apologies. So are the hinges are they a weak? There's a weak spot there.
Well, yeah. Helen thinks. I mean, the question is the hinges in the suggested options, in the 3 different options.
So this is yeah, absolutely. This is a critical, and it's a really good question, actually. I think this is one of the reasons why we want to get these material samples down to site as well, because there's so much about handling a window. You can it's one of those things that you can inherently feel how good it is, how well made it is, how strong and robust it is. And I think, yeah, there are pros and cons with each of these different window options. And I wouldn't like to steer the conversation, but I do know from previous experience that some do behave much better over a longer period of time than others. And so it is important that we plot that out with you guys. We don't want these windows to be failing after 5-10 years. Gosh, that would be awful. That we are wanting to install these in perpetuity. They need to be here in 25-30 years.
Yeah, and Caroline, this is a perfect example where co-design, and the more residents go down to baseline, try out the windows, leave their comments, the more likely we are to come up with a solution that suits you. And one thing's for certain, because these windows are triple glazed and high performing, they're much heavier than the ones you've got just now. The aluminium windows you've got are relatively light. I know some of them stick a bit as you slide them, but these windows will be heavy. So we do need to come down and test them with us to make the right choice on the selection.
Great, thanks, John. David Ward would like to know when you're likely to start installing Windows. I presume that's later down. John, do you want to comment on that?
There's 3 different dates, aren't there, Caroline? There's one date when we'll have some down in baseline for people to test out. Hopefully that's going to happen in a few months' time, within the next few months, hopefully in time for like early, let's say late spring, early summer, when people can actually feel safe to come out of their homes. The pilot scheme, which we've talked about, we expect windows to be installed sometime in probably in the summer. We're not sure if it's going to be early or late. That will depend a little bit on the programming of the works and availability of the windows. And then thirdly is the rollout program for all of the building. Now the work seriously will take more than a year beginning to end. And when that work will start it's many months away. I honestly don't know if we'll even be able to start the main work within a year, but a lot will depend on how quickly we can agree on things with you and with James and his team, and also with the suppliers to get the right price and so on. So that's not maybe exact, but there's kind of 3 dates. One's quite soon, one's a little bit later, and the other one's much closer to the end of the year into next year for the main rollout.
Thanks, John. Thank you. I think that's all for now.
Okay, great. So I'll rattle through the rest of the windows. So this was just about, sorry, Sean, just one up. Oh, there we are. So all 3 windows, the outside facings of the windows can be finished in a very similar way. Polyester powder coated is what you guys previously commented on, and this is essentially a painted option, but it's adhered in a slightly different way, so you get a very consistent finish on the facing. There is another option, which is anodizing. Now we want to raise this conversation with you. Certainly natural anodizing might actually achieve a closer finish to your existing windows, and we just don't want to discount it as of yet. We obviously want to have these conversations with you. One thing to mention is that the Velvac, which we previously identified as having a different internal frame finish, so it's got the timber, that has you have the option for maybe a treated timber or even a painted timber on the internal face of those windows. So that's another thing just to mention. Next slide, please. So I think we've probably already heard quite a bit about the pilot, but this is an empty flat located on the lower levels at Testerton. It's number 411, and it is a 3-bed duplex, so it's spread over 2 floors, and it has been identified as a possible location to trial a number of the systems and the materials that we have been looking at. The approach will be similar to the open house fit out of 317 Barandon, but will be a lot more comprehensive, shall we say, with a focus on the thermal fabric improvements. And it's also primarily about developing clear choice of enhancement measures with you. The plan is, and there's a series of icons down at the bottom there, which indicate how we're wanting to clearly document the different fit out options and the range of ways that we want to communicate this to you. So we want to hold a series of video tours throughout the construction process, so you can come in, week on week or every fortnight. We can come and do a bit of a guided tour. So even if we're all still separated by COVID, we can still communicate back to you guys how we're getting on with the fit out. We want to run a series of informative videos where we can explain a bit more about the different systems that we're looking at installing there. We want to run time-lapse videos. We think this would be really helpful actually, because you set a camera up in the corner of the room, you replace all the windows, and you clearly document how long it takes, how noisy it is, what's involved, how much noise, how much dust, all of that kind of stuff is incorporated within those time-lapse videos. And then that's there in perpetuity. So when we do actually finish it, and we can fit the unit out so that it functions as a bit of an exhibition space, but it clearly documents everything that we've tested, and we can have these time-lapse videos, kind of on a roll on the wall, so that you can see, exactly what it takes to implement some of these measures. The other thing that it's really helping us to do, and I mentioned this previously about the acoustic testings, but it's also about thermal testing, air tightness testing, being able to clearly document how all of these measures are actually really improving the thermal capacity of your buildings and your homes. So we are going to be sending out a booklet about the pilots so that you guys get a bit more understanding as to what we're wanting to do here in the next couple of weeks. I think maybe it's 3 or 4 weeks. We don't want to overload you with information at the moment, but it will be great to kind of pick up this with you in the near future. Next item. Next slide. So minimizing disruption, we have to have probably some quite, tricky conversations in the future, no doubt. The team, us as a team, we want to limit disturbance to you whilst delivering these essential and optional works to improve the walkways. But, health and safety is critical to assessment of these options whilst you are remaining in situ. So the 411 Testerton, we think the pilot will really help to identify the nature of disruption for all of the different packages that we're looking at. And from there on, we can start to plot out a process with you. I think it also enables that degree of choice. You will be able to kind of say, no, I'm not, I just want the essential works, or in actual fact, you know what, if you, a new kitchen or the new internal wall insulation or whatever it is, you can kind of actually more clearly understand what's involved in that process and how long it's going to take. So a range of respite options, temporary and permanent, will be on offer throughout the process. And that's something that I think the Lancaster team will be keeping you up to date as we progress these discussions. Next slide. So next steps, sorry, there's a lot to read through here, but to fully document the current thermal properties of your buildings, we are wanting to run thermal tests. Many of these have already, they're already underway, and they'll be conducted in the common areas and in the 411 Testerton flat. These are as follows. So there's the air permeability testing. That's all about understanding where the air is leaking from your unit, because that has a big impact on the thermal capacity of your buildings. Temperature sensors located in the walkways. So we've been able to understand a bit more about how those function throughout the day. And that's going to be quite crucial in how we start to fit those particular spaces out, how we seek to improve them. In situ U values. So going back to the U value conversations, these help to confirm our technical assessment of the thermal fabric. They are in effect real-time U values, so it's really helpful for us. The thermographic testing on the external facades, and that's the infrared. That's the nice kind of pretty rainbow pictures that we have, which kind of show where the heat is escaping from your buildings, and where that helps us to identify the thermal weak spots in the building envelope. Smart heat transfer coefficient tests. These are tests to evaluate how much energy it takes to heat your homes. So it's really helpful for us to be able to document that. The chap on the right is called Richard Jack. He is from Build Test Solutions. You'll probably see him around about the estate. He has been coming and installing a lot of the sensors, and we'll be hoping to do so in the future. One thing to mention just before we move on to a request for volunteers, we also need to undertake some intrusive work, survey work, in the 411 Testerton flat. Now, we think there's going to be some very short periods, and this is probably going to be over the next, I don't know, it's probably not going to be for another 3 weeks until we actually start. So we will notify you about the periods of disruption. But there will be probably some short, sharp bursts of noise in this part of the building during permitted hours, and we've actually put down in the coming weeks. I think it's probably not going to be until the end of March, beginning of April, that we start to look at opening up some of those areas. Next slide, please. Sure. Thanks. So this is the call for volunteers. So Build Test Solutions, they are monitoring the thermal and energy data across the whole of the estate, and they need to install small temperature and humidity sensors in occupied flats, so we get a clearer understanding of how your buildings are working. They're already installing these in Treadcold House, and there is a video on Instagram explaining the process. So the installation should take between 5 to 10 minutes. And the temperature humidity sensors will need to be in your flat for approximately 3 weeks. This is one in question on the right hand side. So they are not big bits of kit. I think you'll barely even notice they're there. But it would be really super helpful to us to understand more about how your building's behaving. Next slide. Right, I will hand over to Janet at long last. Sorry, Janet.
Hi, thanks, Caroline. So my name's Janet. I am part of a small team that has been brought into the estate to look at the future heating and hot water solution. So we're looking at this at an estate-wide level, but to come up with a solution that is specific to each block and can hopefully make a positive impact in each flat as well. Next slide. So just to give you a bit of the background about how the estate is currently heated. So in the walkways, I'm sure you're aware that you're currently receiving heat and hot water from the temporary boiler located just outside baseline. And there's a similar boiler located up in Camelford Court. Sorry, I'm getting my locations mixed up, which serves all the buildings in the green-yellow outline there. And so that this system currently heats 80% of homes, and there's basically large-scale plumbing. Oh, sorry, next slide. Thanks. So at present, there's a large-scale kind of plumbing that connects each of those boilers to the heating, to the radiators in each of your homes. And that is currently powered by gas. And what we're doing and looking at for the whole estate is how we could make that more efficient and perhaps bring those two heating networks together to form one large scale heating network that will be built to purpose, that will be modern and hopefully give you heating controls that you don't currently have in place. And the other important aspect of the project is to look to move away from gas, because there is a nationwide policy that we should be doing so. So we need to look at the renewable alternative for the estate. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of an overview of what's going to be happening. I've been going to every kind of architect and block meeting throughout the estate over the last few weeks to introduce this potential project. And we will then be doing a co-design series throughout the rest of the month and into early April as well. So hopefully I will see some of you at some events coming up. In the background, what's happening is we have a technical team who is looking at the heating from an engineering perspective. So they're evaluating what kind of renewable options can really be used on the estate. So you might have seen two guys just outside of the walkway. We're actually putting temperature sensors into sewers, as this may be a form of heating that we can actually use on this estate. Next slide. So hopefully lots of you have already sent me these. I've only got 10% responses from everyone in this state, so I still need to see a lot more kind of opinions, but we have shared a survey to everyone to look at what the heating and hot water situation is like currently. If you haven't got one of these, please email me or give the customer service desk a call and I'll get one sent out to you. But we recognise that lots of people have different heating needs, and we would like to see that we address these in the future solutions. So please get in touch.
Thanks, Janet. Yes, Caroline.
So yeah, I mean it's really about continuing the conversation now, isn't it? We want to hear about your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns, as James mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, and you know, about the information that we presented this evening in relation to both your individual homes and your communal share spaces. In particular, we want to hear more about your communal spaces, if possible. Are there any aspects of these unique spaces, because they are pretty unique, which you particularly like or dislike? And one thing, I'm sorry, we glossed over it a wee bit earlier. When we talk about the atriums, we are talking about the communal corridors at the hearts of your building, which open up to the roof lights. So they're a series of interconnected spaces, but when we talk about the atriums or the atria, that's what we're referring to. I hope that we can get that into kind of common parlance, because a corridor is obviously quite different and it behaves in quite a different way. So in terms of terminology, it's quite helpful for us to be able to refer to them like that. We'll also undertake a series of follow-up surveys, so giving every household an opportunity to engage and feedback their ideas, preferences and concerns. I can't say it enough, we really want to hear from you guys about, you know, what you think about what we've been investigating. If we're, you know, if you feel we're quite wide of the mark, we want to hear about it. So I think also, just to finish, the pilot will give us a real opportunity to assess the impact of the different measures and the levels of disruption that will be required for each. So we really feel like it's such a good opportunity. I know that there will be some disruption from that, you know, from that unit. There will be some noise coming out of that unit in the, you know, the next couple of months. We fully acknowledge that, so we're going to be writing to you about that. And obviously, I think, you know, Adnan and Sharon from the fit out team, they've already quite established an approach to noise, you know, at certain times of the day. And I think there's already a bit of a procedure set out for us there. So we'll be adhering to anything that they've already kind of set up. Should we move on to the next slide from me?
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, we're going to be sending out follow-up material that will include the details shown on the slides to all of you guys and the rest of the Walkways residents. The slides and a recording of the meeting will also be going on the website, as Bunmi mentioned, and we're undertaking those follow-up surveys. We'll be contacting you about those, the booklet for the pilot in 411 Testerton, so we'll be using that to update you as to you know, the more kind of intricate details of what we're looking at doing there. And finally, we're also hoping to hold a series of lighting workshops for the walkways. That's in the pipeline at the moment. We are kind of convening the Lancaster and the KCA team to plot out the best series of events to understand more about your lighting, and hopefully just bring a bit of joy to a lot of these future interactions, because obviously lighting is something which has the potential to completely transform the space, and we want to get you as involved as possible with all of those decisions, because ultimately these are your spaces, so we want you to be able to curate them. I think that's it. Is that the end of the presentation?
Yeah, so next slide, please.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I wanted to let you know about the e-newsletter we launched in October last year for residents of the estate. It's the best way to keep up to date with all the refurbishment news on the estate. You can either scan the QR code or follow the link in the chat. I believe Linda's going to put the link in the chat. Anyway, and there are also posters on all the notice boards around the estate with the QR code, or you can find it on our Instagram bio, Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team. So when you sign up, you have the option of putting which block you live in, which is really helpful if we move to block newsletters in the future. A recording of this meeting will be going up on our YouTube channel and also embedded in our We Are W11 app, which you can download from the App Store and on our website. If you do have any further questions about the presentation or comments, then please get in touch with the Lancaster West team. Thanks to everyone once again for joining us. I thought that was a very useful meeting and great questions and really good answers from KCA as well as James. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today, and hopefully see you sometime soon. Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Much appreciated.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.